Hello, welcome to Podcast Envy Behind the Scenes Live. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and today I've got some special treats for you. So hold on tight. So these live streams, if you have never been here before, are designed to give you a behind the scenes peek at how I create my podcast, which is Podcast Envy, a podcast all about the craft and culture of podcasting. And so I am either here recording an episode or I am telling you about a forthcoming episode and giving you some behind the scenes scoop on why that episode, what's important to pay attention to, etc. Sometimes I'm recording an intro. Today it's kind of a mix of all of the above. So if you are watching the replay of this, then feel free to comment if you are on a platform that allows you to comment, particularly LinkedIn. I think YouTube you can comment on, and I will be more than happy to respond to comments after the fact. And if you are listening to the audio of this as it comes out in the Podcast Envy feed, you won't even hear this part because I'll have I'll have edited it out by then. But welcome in any case. Let me cue this up here. So today we are recording the majority of the episode that will be coming out next week, though there may be some parts that I insert after the fact before I send it to Edwin to do the final audio mix on it. But this episode is in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month. Were you aware that that's what this month is? And, well, let's just go ahead and start the show. What do you think? Welcome to Power Your Story podcast. Wait, this is Podcast Envy, and I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. Now, why did I mess up and say Power Your Story podcast? Well, that was no mistake. Today, I'm featuring some of the fantastic, amazing, wonderful, mind-blowingly talented student producers in my high school podcast mentoring program in Chicago. Say that 5 times fast. Now, before you skip forward to another show or another episode thinking, I am so over high school, let me ask you this. How are you doing? No, seriously. I know I'm being really corny and, whatever right now, but seriously, how are you doing? Right now, it is May, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I don't know about you, but it feels kind of like a cruel joke to me right now to say that. Like, for example, just yesterday, I left a short Voxer message for my business coach, which was all of maybe 13 seconds long, half of which was just me laughing hysterically into the electronic ether. Now, mind you, this was after several other long messages about, well, things that I have messed up recently, things that are beyond my control, economic forces that are shaping my reality in every moment of every day. It was a lot. Anyways, she's tough. She can handle it. In my work as a podcast strategist, consultant, and producer, I have clients, colleagues, and yes, even friends in the nonprofit, corporate, small business, education sectors. And it feels like everyone is struggling in some way right now. Financial, emotional, social, existential. We are all just exhausted. And I don't fully know why. I mean, I've read a lot of articles and blogs and listened to a lot of podcasts about why, so I have some ideas. But honestly, who is out? Oh, that sounded crazy. But like, honestly, who is out there traipsing through daisy fields in the sunshine with the Beatles' Good Day Sunshine playing in the background of your mind right now? What's your secret to being carefree? What's your secret to the carefree, happy life right now? There's got to be at least 5 of you. I see you on Instagram. Or is that a real? Now, in general, in my life, I consider myself to be a pretty strong, stable, mentally healthy person, even when I have gone through some things. And as your trustworthy podcast boss, I would love to say that all of the stressful things roll off my back like water on a duck. I've got this. But lately, the only way I can describe my state of mind is fragile. But I bounce back and I keep on podcasting. And now I'm trying to learn that being mentally healthy doesn't necessarily mean that we don't also fall apart sometimes. So if you are an entrepreneur, a small business owner, a nonprofit employee, an educator, a corporate employee, fearful of company layoffs, a parent, a student, anyone at all, really, and you are struggling, I see you. I feel you. And let's just take a deep breath in together. But this is not a podcast about mental health. Surprise. This is a podcast about podcasting. So let me circle this right back around to why you're really here. Both in this live stream and in the full episode that we'll be releasing on Podcast Envy next week, I want to play you some clips from Power Your Story, my student mentees podcast. And I will be, of course, linking to the full episodes that I am featuring here in their feed just as soon as they release publicly over the next few days. One second. I am going to make a little bit of an adjustment here. Okay, that is better. So in a few moments, I am going to play you some clips from Power Your Story, my student mentees podcast. And of course, I will be linking to the full episodes that I am referencing here in their feed just as soon as they release over the next few days. First of all, we have an episode about mental health and peer support featuring peer support specialist and mental health advocate, Lego aficionado, and my very good friend, Ashley Scott, interviewed by Elvis, Emery, Jules, and Alejandro. And I also want to shout out 2 other episodes that we'll be releasing in the next few days, which are about sleep and insomnia, produced by Leonardo and Dwayne, and mindfulness and the law of attraction, produced by May and Haisan. All of these episodes are coming out this month, May 2023, on Power Your Story. So for now, we are going to hear 3 clips. How do I want to transition that? Let me think about this for a second. So we're going to hear 3 clips from the interview with Ashley Scott. And I am not just playing these clips to brag about how awesome my students are. And I am not just playing these clips in order to brag about how awesome my students really are. We have been talking here on Podcast Envy over the last few episodes about how... I didn't finish that sentence. Great scripting, Andrea. Over the last few episodes of Podcast Envy, we have been talking about how to make a more entertaining show to keep your audience engaged, to keep them listening to the end of your episode and coming back episode after episode after episode, rather than trying one episode and then dropping off so that you have to find more and more and more people all the time. This is an audience growth strategy that is about turning the casual listener into a follower, into a raving fan of your show by providing them with both education and entertainment. And this is a formula that I have been teaching to my students even before I realized that it was a conscious formula over the past few years. And so the clips that I am going to share with you, I also have a few things to say specifically about how those students showed up with their podcast hosting skills to facilitate a space where our guest felt safe enough to be extremely vulnerable, open, and conversational in a way where everyone felt seen, heard, understood, and validated. And I think when it comes to the intersection of mental health and podcasting, that is the best outcome we could all hope for. Now, before we get to the clips, I'd love to introduce you to today's podcast angel, the Podcast Envy Refresh. I don't want to say times are tough because, that's not the vibe I want to attract. But you know that feeling when you just know deep in your gut that things could be even better than they are? Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I am not a mental health service provider, though I would love to point you to my clients' podcasts, Conversations with a Wounded Healer and Transforming Trauma. For that, linked in the show notes, of course. But I am a podcast service provider, and I can help you refresh your show. So whether you love making your podcast, but you're just not sure it's working as well for you as it could be, or you have fallen out of love with producing and it's starting to feel like a chore, don't give up yet. Book a 20-minute virtual tea date with me to see if the Podcast Envy Refresh is exactly what the doctor ordered. You can schedule your appointment at thecreativeimposter.com/T420. That's TEAFOR20. When you book, I will send you a short but sweet questionnaire to complete before our call. Once again, that's thecreativeimposter.com/T420 for the Podcast Envy Refresh. And I would love to also mention our podcast angel, Sleep Phones, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you have trouble falling asleep, if someone in the room nearby you snores, sleep phones are for you. I think that sleep, good quality, enjoyable sleep is one of the best ways to care for our mental health. And in this moment, I am looking up something because I just forgot when this promo code expires. Da-da-da-da. Where are you, promo code? I do actually really love my sleep phones. Sleep phones are like, they're amazing. It's a soft, fleecy headband that you can put on that is not going to fall off of your head or move around. It's like pajamas for your ears, and it is Bluetooth, so you can play your favorite podcast to fall asleep to, and it helps block out some of the other sounds. I think for summer, I'm going to order this silky one that they have that's not fleecy, but looks also lovely. So that's what sleep phones are. And right now, I can't find it. I'll have to insert it later. Right now, you can get 10% off your very own pair of sleep phones at thecreativeimposter.com/sleep phones. Again, that's thecreativeimposter.com/sleep phones. And when you get your 10% discount through that URL, they will send me a lovely little thank you back for referring you. That promo code is only good through something like June 10th. Why can't I find this? It has to be on the bedtime playlist episode. Get 10% off your purchase of sleep phones through June 8th, 2023 with the promo code ENVY10. So once again, go to thecreativeimposter.com/sleep phones, enter promo code ENVY10 to get 10% off, and then they're going to send me a little thank you gift for sending you their way. All right, June 8th. That's your deadline. You have to get your sleep phones by then so that you can get your 10% discount. It's actually significant. All right, that is the Podcast Angel segment. And now I want to play you a clip from Power Your Story, our interview with Ashley Scott. And this is actually my first time sharing on StreamYard from Descript as opposed to a web browser. So I hope you can hear this. Let me know if you are watching and you cannot hear the audio. So this is Emery interviewing Ashley Scott, and I'll tell you why I chose this clip in a moment.
That also goes into...
Nope, that's not correct. App settings. Quick actions, project settings. How do I get the audio to play not through the speakers? From Descript. I thought it would just automatically know that I wanted it to play through the screen share. Oh man. I should have tested this. Output through
That also goes into a direction that has, like, what parts of your career do you struggle with or have difficulty with at times?
Honestly, just like you, Emily, I struggle with anxiety. So I like to share with people my diagnosis because I think that it is helpful. So I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I was diagnosed with panic disorder, which is a type of anxiety disorder. And I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so those things are really challenging. Like, it can be really debilitating, some of the experiences that come from that. And so that is a really hard one. Managing my own mental health and really staying within my body and in my space and maintaining my hobbies and things that I enjoy while I have this purpose.
Okay, I'm pretty sure the audio of that clip was not playing through the live stream. So let this be a lesson to you, producers. Test these things before you just go live and do them. I have no idea how to get the audio to play from Descript into StreamYard. I thought that I could do where I wanted the audio to play, but from the software, but it's not working. So I will not be able to play you the clip right now. What I'll have to do is I will have to tell you what is in the clip and then explain why I wanted to share this specific clip. And then you can listen to it in the full episode when it comes out next week, Thursday. I don't see where to put this out. So, in the first clip, we have Emery interviewing Ashley Scott, and she asked her what is challenging about her career working in peer support and as a mental health advocate. And Ashley basically explains that what's challenging is struggling with anxiety. And she talks about the different diagnoses that she's had in terms of her own mental health, because when you work in peer support, as Ashley explains in the episode, it is because you have relatable experiences to the people that you are helping. So you can tell them about your story and your experiences and help them to manage their own. And so she's talking about some of the uncertainty that she's had. She's talked about how important it is to share her story and knowing that sometimes she can get sucked right back into these old traumas that have occurred. And the reason why I pulled this clip is not only because Ashley's sharing really valuable, really valuable stories and insights for us in terms of mental health, but the reason why I'm sharing it on a podcasting episode is because after that, Emery thanks Ashley for sharing that. She says something like, "Thank you so much for sharing that. I understand like how hard it must be to like share some stuff, like especially diagnoses, because I don't like doing that either. But I want to like let you know that I'm sure many people are grateful to hear that from you. And I am too, that like you're able to share your story. And I'm glad that you're learning how to sort of like balance yourself out also when it comes to your job. So thank you so much again for that." And that's the reason why I shared the clip, because as the podcast host, Emery did not just hear Ashley's answer and move on to the next question. Emery paused at the end of the response, having fully listened to what Ashley was saying, being fully present with her, and then acknowledged and reflected back to her what she was saying. So this is the reason why I pulled this clip. And I actually use this as an example for the students in my program as well, that yes, you can prepare your questions all day long. You can do your guest research. You can know what it is that you want to talk to your guest about. And yet, part of being a star podcast host is being present, listening, reflecting back. Not only does this help to, as Karen Yates talked about in our recent episode about being an awesome podcast host, not only does it help your guest to feel more comfortable and to open up even more than they might have otherwise, it also helps your audience to digest and process and fully embrace what it is your guest is sharing with them, especially when it is a deep or difficult or emotional topic. Having this host reflection in your interview can help your audience to also fully be present with your guest in the same way that you, the host, are being. So that is why I chose this first clip with Emery to showcase. The next clip that I wish I could play you, but once again, I failed to figure out the technology of how to get my audio in Descript to screen share play through LinkedIn, is with the same interview, but this is another podcasting student named Jules. And so Jules, this question came a little bit later after Emery's section. So the students basically, when they do a group interview, they kind of like hand it off. They pass the mic back and forth to each other. So this came later, and Jules had planned questions, but then Jules actually went a little bit off script from what their planned questions were and decided to build off of what Emery and Ashley had been talking about. So again, Jules, as the co-host, was present with the conversation that they were having, even though it wasn't their time to be the host necessarily in that moment, and then decided to build off of that with the following question. So Jules introduces themselves and says, earlier with Emery, you had mentioned like you tell your own stories about like your own mental health. So my question was, how do you deal with this? Transcript is wrong. How do you deal with your mental health? Like, what do you do to deal with it? Do you have self-care days or do you journal? And so then Ashley goes on to describe all of the things, well, not all of the things, but some of the things that she does for her own mental health. Things from working with a therapist to working with medical doctors for medication, for depression, or for anxiety. Then she also talks about practical things like slowing down and counteracting her thoughts and just kind of being aware of what her thoughts are and having compassion for what she's going through. And so she gives an example. Let's say I woke up and I started the morning with a headache and I stubbed my toe, and maybe something that I wanted to really come through and didn't really come through. And those things are making me feel really bad physically in my body. I start to have negative thoughts. They say, Ashley, you're so dumb. Why can't you do anything right? You know, and it spirals from there. In that moment, when I'm having those thoughts, I try to stop and I say to myself, Ashley, this is normal. Sometimes you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes things don't go right, and that's okay. And every day doesn't have to be a great day. Some days are going to be really great, others not so much, and that's part of being human. So talking to herself the way a good friend would, instead of talking to herself the way a bully or an enemy would. And so then she also talks about relaxing by watching some like lighthearted cartoons that she really likes. And so those are some of the examples that she gives of how she takes care of her own mental health. And part of the reason I pulled this clip with Jules as the host is because, as I mentioned, Jules was present for the whole conversation and was building off of what their co-host had started, where their co-host led the conversation, and then where Ashley, the guest, took it. And then Jules was able to pick that up and continue from there, even though that wasn't what was planned or scripted. And that is following the lead with your guest, still being in control of the container of the interview, but being able to veer off course in a direction that is naturally going, that is going to be interesting and beneficial for your listener. And then Jules follows up in a similar way that Emery did by sharing their own reflection of what Ashley said. That's actually very interesting because I actually do the same thing with like watching a show or sometimes something like that to take my mind off of it. And then Jules shares about how sometimes they wake up feeling off or, you know, saying positive things and how they're going to take that advice and try it themselves. I think I might start taking that advice myself. So this is a way of relating to the guest, acknowledging that what the guest is sharing is valuable, and setting an example for your listeners, for your audience that they can learn from. This is like super advanced podcasting hosting stuff that I'm not even sure whether they learned that from me. This is stuff that like, this is about being an empathetic listener. This is about critical thinking. This is about being present in the moment. And this is about thinking about your guest, yourself, and your listener all at the same time. And then the third clip that I wanted to share is kind of an example of the fruits of your labor if you do all of those things that I just told you. So this third clip is from one of the co-hosts of the episode, Elvis. And Elvis actually had asked the first few sort of establishing questions at the beginning of the interview. What is peer support? How did you get into this work? You know, all those kind of establishing background things. And by the end of the interview, because his colleagues and co hosts had asked these other deeper questions, and Ashley had shared so openly about her own struggles with mental health, her struggles with anxiety. We even touched on the topic of suicidal ideation and, personal stories of what has happened in her family and things like that. That at the end of the interview, we always, whenever we have an interview guest in Power Your Story, we always open an opportunity at the end, if we have time, if we've gone through our planned interview with the students who are producing, we always have other students that are there listening to the interview, because it's kind of like a class, right? So we might have like 15 students in the Google Meet while we're recording, and maybe 4 of them are actually hosting the interview and the other 11 or whatever are listening. And some are listening better than others, don't get me wrong. But we always open up an opportunity at the end of the interview to see if anyone else had any questions that they wanted to ask our guest. And sometimes it might be a student who was listening, who was not one of the original producers of the particular interview, or it might be one of the co-hosts of the interview who has since thought of a new question that they wanted to make sure to ask. And so that's the case with Elvis. Elvis had started off the interview, and then at the end, after we had gone through all of these other deeper topics, Elvis chimed in and said, also, I want to add, like, for me, I have a hard time from my mental health, because since I have anxiety too, and I've been having kind of feeling nervous, like when someone has butterflies in their stomachs, and also sweaty hands, like I feel really nervous. So I've been feeling that before, and I just want to share that. So what was interesting is we asked, does anybody else have any questions for Ashley? And Elvis, rather than asking a question, he felt like this was a safe space for him to share what he had been struggling with on the topic. And it wasn't even a question. It was just, I hear everything you're saying, and I want to share this with you as well. And Ashley is a brilliant guest who, again, we're talking about being present. We're talking about showing up to be of service, being open, wanting to be helpful. And so she responds empathetically. Yeah, those are really typical things that happen with anxiety. So I really understand. And then she gives an example that further validates what he's saying. Like, even right now, she's like, I'm here as the peer support specialist and mental health advocate. I'm here as your guest that you're interviewing, telling you all these things. And even today, I got super nervous about this interview. And my brain was like, well, you have to practice all the questions, or think of every question they could possibly ask you. And then you have to be perfect. And then, and the anxiety was like building and building even before doing this interview with my students. And so then she says, I just had to breathe and distract myself and do the best that I can, and know that whenever I go somewhere, I'm just going to do the best that I can. And people usually really like that. And so the fact that the exchange that was happening in real time between the hosts who were showing up prepared, but also present and flexible within that container, gave space for Ashley to show up fully prepared, but flexible and open to relate back to them in real time, created the space for that student to feel comfortable to share his experiences. And this is what I'm talking about when, before I played these clips, I said that this exchange and this example of this exchange in the context of a podcast interview happened in a way where the container allowed the guest to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, open, and conversational, and also for our hosts to be that way as well, in a way where everyone felt seen, heard, understood, and validated. And honestly, like, you can talk about podcasting for marketing, you can talk about podcasting for sales, you can talk about podcasting for growing your audience, you can talk about podcasting for business. To me, this is the reason why I love podcasting. This is the value. And not every show is about mental health, like, of course. But this kind of open exchange that happens on a very intimate level that the audience, the listeners, then get to listen into later, that's it. That's the magic. And so that is what I wanted to share with you today. How do you turn the casual listener into a follower, into a raving fan? You create this kind of safe, intimate container to talk about things that are really important. You make the space for your guests to feel seen and heard. You make the space to be present, and you make the space for your audience to feel seen and heard. And you compel them to be present in this experience with you. All right. That's what I had for you today. Thank you so much for those of you who stopped by. I hope that you enjoyed these examples. I hope that if you are watching the video of this on social media, I'm so sorry that I couldn't get the actual clips to play, but this episode will be airing on Podcast Envy in your favorite podcast app and at podcastenvy.com next week, Thursday. And also the full episode, along with the episodes about sleep and insomnia and mindfulness and the law of attraction, will also be coming out on Power Your Story, which you can find in your favorite podcast app and at poweryourstorypodcast.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.